Vanitas are a style of realistic still-life paintings popularized in the Dutch Golden Age. Vanitas is the Latin word for vanity, and these paintings are essentially used as mirrors to reflect the viewer's own mortality and selfish desires. Memento mori, an object serving as a warning or reminder of death. Translated, remember, you must die. Of course, to us today, it is still obvious that skulls represent death, but these paintings are full of other symbols that we don't recognize without digging into the history. So let's dive into the hidden symbols of Vanitas paintings. Skulls represent death, but so do clocks, burning candles, soap bubbles, and rotten food. All these objects show the temporary nature of life and the passing of time. Seafood and meat usually represent luxury, indulgence into the pleasures of life, such as oysters representing lust, and lobsters gluttony. Glass and silver cups, sometimes half empty and sometimes tipped over, represent the emptiness of wealth and material possessions. Reflections in glass call back to the idea of self-reflection. Goblets of wine, pipes, tobacco, and playing cards all reference addiction. While purses, jewelry, gold, and luxury items such as seashells represent greed. Musical instruments, especially lutes and flutes, represent an indulgence of pleasure, especially flutes, which bring to mind a Greek style of promiscuity. Probably the most unusual symbol on this list will be snails. Quiz time. Which biblical character did snails represent? Time's up! The correct answer is the Virgin Mary. At the time, people thought snails reproduced asexually, making all snails technically virgins. We now know that this is not true, but seeing snails appreciated to this level is really heartwarming. Maps and books are a confusing addition to the list of symbols. The popularity of Vanitas was influenced by the rise of Calvinism in the Netherlands. Calvinism is a branch of Protestantism, and a huge part of Protestant religion's spreading in Europe was books, specifically the invention of the Gutenberg printing press in 1440. Books had become more common by the 1600s, but they were still expensive items for the higher class. So was this luxurious quality of books the reason they're in Vanitas? Not quite. Vanitas evolved from earlier still life trends such as ontbit, or breakfast pieces, which were warnings against gluttony, and even earlier afsprankstilleven, or ostentatious paintings, which were the exact opposite of Vanitas. They celebrated representations of luxuries, fanciful items, and banquets of food. Instead of a warning against indulgence, they were painted entirely for pleasure. There are books in many of these afsprankstilleven, but they are books that people buy and display, but never actually finish. Calvinists and Dutch peoples did not hate books themselves, but using them as decorations or status symbols instead of actually reading them was considered shameful. Focusing on pleasures while ignoring other subjects, especially spiritual, is what Vanitas were trying to warn against. But let's get back into the other symbols of the paintings. The Netherlands is famous for their tulips. So it's no surprise that different types of flowers have varying messages. They usually symbolize something positive unless they are rotting. Daisies were pure, carnations romantic, and tulips represent nobility. Fruits also can be very particular. Pomegranates mean resurrection. Apples mean original sin of Adam and Eve. Pears mean marital faithfulness. Lemons can be positive and negative, sometimes representing bitter deception, and other times an encouragement for practicing moderation, because lemon water was often used to water down alcohol to make it less potent. Bugs are a bit easier to understand. Flies and maggots represent death. Butterflies symbolize change. caterpillars are associated with rebirth, ants with destruction, bees are associated with sacrifice because they sacrifice themselves for the hive, and beetles represent salvation and immortality, probably because of the European association of stag beetles with Thor. Now that you understand the meaning of these symbols, take a look at these paintings and try to understand the message of each one. The owner of this painting obviously had or knew someone with a smoking problem, while this owner might have had the tendency of falling in love too quickly. Whatever the struggle, you can usually find Vanitas addressing one or several of these issues. So who actually paid for these images to be made? The Dutch people loved paintings. As the English writer John Evelyn said, pictures are very common here in the Netherlands, there being scarce and ordinary tradesmen whose house is not decorated with them. But often the lower classes had prints or amateur street art. A piece of street art would be a few coins, but a professional Vanitas, painted with very specific objects, would be like buying a small house. Only the upper echelon of society could afford them, though lower classes would copy the trend. They were also valued highly because of their incredible realism. In an era with no cameras, the more realistic the painting, the more it was worth. Masaccio's Trinity from the 1420s was so shockingly realistic, the common people thought they could reach into the painting. Imagine showing this to them. If you're having trouble understanding the hype, compare it to viral trends such as modern cake art. We are still shocked by the illusion of realism. What allowed these artists to make such realistic paintings was practice and oil-based paint. But oil is also difficult to work with. The pigment was expensive, sometimes poisonous, it was hard to clean without chemicals, and it took years to master. All this made Vanitas more and more expensive. The value of these paintings creates a paradox to the message they are supposed to convey. Were the artists and patrons aware of this? Or were they so caught up in the lifestyle they couldn't see the irony? Were they made sincerely to be observed? Or were they following a trend to appear more religious? Whether sincere or not, the concept of self-reflection through objects continues to be used by artists. Modern iterations of Vanitas are being made, many addressing the same issues and objects. If you had a Vanitas painting, what would you put in it?